Before today's topic, a quick disclaimer. The stories and data we share come from the states that we practice in and the experiences we personally had, which can differ greatly across our country and certainly the globe. This is not a professional advice show. So get comfy and let's discuss death.
Hello, and welcome to MortMic, a down-to-earth discussion on death and dying. I'm Jem.
And I am Red, and this week we are your funeral home and home funeral directors.
So I think a lot of us are familiar with the concept of a parlor. It's a room in the front of your house that generally has no purpose these days, but back in the day, it used to be used for a very specific reason. And whether it was briefly or for a long period of time, the parlor in the front of the house was often used to display bodies. And not just any bodies. These were the bodies of your family members, of your husband, your wife, your children, whoever might have passed away at home, because back then, people didn't die so much in hospitals. People didn't die so much under hospice or in nursing homes. People died at home. And when you died at home, it was a family affair. Tasks like washing the dead, preparing for burial, laying out the body, and getting them ready in the casket were often given to family members. Obviously, at some point in our history, we kind of grew away from that model. People are dying in hospitals more often. It's a very sterile environment. We have funeral directors and funeral homes taking care of our deceased. A lot of what we used to do involving the deceased and our deceased relatives is very hands-off now. We don't touch the bodies. We don't want anything to do with the process of getting them prepared for burial, for cremation, anything like this. How did this change? Why did it change? And what did it used to be like?
So yeah, how did we get to where we are today? Really, if you look back in the old tomes and on the wall scratchings and caves. No, not really. But some way, shape, or form, death care professionals have been around forever. Obviously, dead bodies have been around as long as people have, and we've needed people who dispose of those bodies. So we've always had somebody in the community, whether it's in the tribe or whatever it happens to be, that would help dispose of these bodies. And as time went on, what we think of in terms of, the quote unquote undertaker was really just a salesman. They started off as just salesmen, cabinet makers, people that created funeral merchandises and built coffins. And they eventually started to branch out a bit into doing extra things. So selling what ye olde printing looked like prayer cards and things like that. They started to diversify into the merchandises that they could sell for others that are conducting funerals, for families that were having services.
Right, so we talked about how the funeral would be held at the family home. Say you still wanted a coffin, but you didn't know how to make one. That's where the undertaker would come into play, right? Something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, basically to fill in the merchandise needs of those things. You knew the local guy who builds furniture and caskets. That's just his thing. But at this point, the undertaker wasn't involved with actually conducting any services. This is where the family really was involved. We're having the services, having people come to the, parlor of their home to say goodbye to the deceased and to pay respects to the family as well. So what really started to push this change for undertakers to become more cemented in the funeral industry as we know it today started with really the Civil War. And so the Civil War, obviously a lot of men and women are dying away from home in distant lands, and these people, their widows, their parents want them back home. And so they were traveling via train car to get home, but arriving, days and days later, basically decomposed. So embalming was already a thing that was being experimented with. So Thomas Holmes really made that widespread and standardized here in the Americas. And that became the standard. You would have like an embalming tent on the battleground that you would embalm and then ship these folks on back home.
So embalming did first start to happen overseas, and I think it was like the UK or some European country over there. Sorry, guys. But of course, it was brought over to the Americas, and this history is actually so interesting. I love it. If you guys like know or listen to our last episode, I talked about how I grew up like in the South on the East Coast, so around like the Civil War battlegrounds and stuff like that. So there's like we could talk about this in another episode, like it's so crazy cool. But basically what would happen was that soldiers would die on the battlefield. There would be like embalmers and like trainee embalmers like running out to the battlefield to like get these people to embalm them. Like this industry was so booming and the money was there that there was literally people like running out to the bodies to go get them to embalm them. Like crazy stuff. So cool.
So in conglomeration with that, we also have large cities becoming even larger. They're booming, they're developing, and there's overcrowding. Also, people don't have like the big family home anymore. It's all these tiny little apartments, not really conducive to having, a body laid out for any extended period of time with visitors. And then we also have transportation of the deceased and family when there needs to be like a service at church and a body needs to go to church, and as does the family. Like they don't have the means of transporting these people to the places they need to go. So the undertakers basically saw like a need for more involvement and basically in slow progression inserted themselves into a niche that didn't exist and needed to because society had developed to a point that they needed an extra hand.
And we talked about this before in one of our very early episodes, but the funeral director, as we know him or her or them, was the funeral director, as we know them, was actually a profession way before the time of the medical examiner or pathologist or even coroner. So the funeral director has been around for a very, very long time, even before we knew like what was killing people specifically.
Yeah, definitely. And so as funeral directors and funeral homes became a standardized thing, some organizations started cropping up and laws came into effect that were to protect, public health and safety, to protect, the funeral home and the consumer. So that's where we kind of get to today, is all of this stuff culminating together, essentially.
Yeah, so like I was saying before, like because we sort of started learning like what germs were and like what like decomposing means and like how people die and like what diseases are, I feel like that's when there started to be more like regulations. The general population started to learn about these things too and became concerned with germs and became concerned with stuff that could possibly kill you. So this kind of transferred over to how people view dead bodies and how people handled the deceased, I think. So as these regulations started to be put into place, the funeral home obviously became an establishment in any sort of community, and oftentimes deaths started to be funneled through the funeral home almost always. So like gradually it happened, but we're not seeing, parlor funerals. We're not seeing wakes at anyone's home anymore. And it's mostly a concern for germs and for just, convenience sake, honestly. This was also a time in America, and this also came from overseas, is that funeral homes, like the more like elaborate and the more luxurious your funeral was, kind of indicated how successful you were in life and how much your family loved you. So this was something that happened where the consumer wanted, or the client family wanted the best for their deceased relative, and the funeral homes provided this. They provided a nice, community center for a funeral home to take place. They provided great embalming, so you looked like brand new, like you weren't even dead. They provided, flowers and like adornments and beautiful caskets. This is where we're moving away from the traditional home, family take care of the body funeral to the like luxurious modern day funeral.
Yeah, definitely. A lot more ritzy. We're going from like the Motel 8 to like the Ritz-Carlton of funerals at this point.
Right. And I feel like what's kind of happening now, which is really interesting, is that there's this movement that we talk about all the time called the death positive movement. And it's basically about taking the traditionalist, like modern traditional funeral home, which is like those two words don't go together, but it's what it's called. And, bringing it back to to the roots, like bringing it back to the roots. And I feel like this goes with a lot of stuff, like, like clean eating, like, environmentalism, stuff like this, like
Hmm.
taking the modern traditional funeral and bringing it back to the home, moving away from embalming, even moving away from cremation. This is a movement that's happening that's, still small, but I think it's quickly gaining ground for sure.
Yeah, it's super, like you said, very small. It's about as small as the green movement is at this point. But it's there. It's definitely there. I've experienced it in the last year, maybe twice.
So we actually talked about this when we guested over at Scary Stories We Tell podcast, which was great, by the way. Go listen to it if you have a chance. But there is, a big death positive movement that a lot of people are jumping on. And if you want resources for that, a really, really, really good place to start is the Order of the Good Death, which is a group founded by Caitlin Doty, who I highly recommend for anything death positive. And it's really just like, bringing everything back to, like I said before, the roots, and, taking away like the big, kind of like behind the curtain, sort of like erasing death from our culture kind of view that modern traditional funerals have.
Absolutely. And I think that a place to start with this, which we're seeing, I mean, this is almost half, if not more, of the families that I serve, it starts before death. It starts before somebody dies. So a really good way to get involved with this is hospice. Making sure that, when our families fall ill and, they're imminent, they're going to die, to bring them back home, bring them to their home, bring them to your family home to take care of them as they pass on.
Yeah, definitely. I love hospice.
Oh, me too.
It's kind of scary. Like, I get it. I get that, and that's the thing that we want to try to like conquer, is that death is scary and we're afraid of the diseases. It's nothing to be afraid of. Especially with hospice, like, every family is different. I get it. Every family dynamic is different. But like, if you can, bring your family member home and, they're terminally ill, like there's no chance that like sitting in a hospital is going to do them any good. Bring them home. You still have a nurse that comes and takes care of them, depending on what hospice, company you go with. It's really just scaled to like what you're comfortable with. And you can have your relative pass away peacefully in a place that they're comfortable, surrounded by their loved ones. And I think it's beautiful. Like, I really appreciate hospice.
Yeah, absolutely. It creates this connection with our loved ones that we normally you wouldn't be given the opportunity to have in the hospital. I mean, half the times people pass away at hospitals when their families aren't even there, and
Mhm.
you're alerted to it at 3 a.m, like, oh, sorry, grandpa died, and you never got to have that goodbye, and they were essentially alone at a hospital by themselves
Mhm.
without their family,
Mhm.
which it's kind of heartbreaking. And that's why I'm so glad that hospice is such a big thing now. Like, it's like I said, so many of the families that we serve. So I feel like, bringing the actual funeral back to the funeral home isn't that far fetched when we think that we were already bringing someone dying back to the home.
Right. So, in hospice, you're basically set up in a hospital bed, like in your living room or bedroom or whatever. A funeral is essentially the same thing, except you're just like not living anymore.
Right.
Back in the day, they would literally just like put the bodies like in a bed, or like Red said, like in a coffin, like set up in like the parlor room or living room or whatever, and just have it there. And there's really no difference. The thing about dead bodies is that unless there's a specific disease process, they're really not that dangerous, especially within the first like 24 to 48 hours. Like, they're really not, like, the germs on a dead body are not going to like kill you.
Right. And that's why I get tenuous when we talk about, like passing on disease through dead bodies to like humans. It's it's once you get past those like 48 hours. That's when like bacteria are virulent enough within the bloodstream to actually like do anything.
Right.
But it's
Or
so
if
it's
there's like a specific like disease, like,
like MRSA or
HIV, or like, yeah,
tuberculosis, yeah.
MRSA. Yeah, it's nothing to be afraid of. And actually, something really cool that's been kind of gaining some headway is we talked about this before too, but the death doulas. I love the death doulas. I've never met one before, but I really want to. Basically, think of like a midwife. So, you know how a midwife goes to your home to help you deliver your baby at home or even in the hospital. The death doula does the same thing, except for, you know, a dying individual. So preparing them for death, because death is a big deal. It's not just something that people are ready to do. So having a death doula there to kind of guide you through that, and even guide the family through that and all those emotions and what decisions to make and what you can do, is really advantageous for most people.
So I actually had a coworker that recently worked with a family who had a younger child pass away. He was like in his 20s, I believe, and he was asking me questions. He was like, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do," because this family didn't want anything to do with us. They knew that they had to have the funeral home involved to get the death certificate signed and filed away with the clerk's office. But besides that, they did not want their son to come to our funeral home. They did not want him embalmed. They wanted to take him to his grave themselves. And like both of us, I remember I felt so bad. I was so unprepared because we're both looking at each other like, I don't actually know about this. So it's very important to check your state laws as a funeral director and as a family to see what actually necessitates like having a funeral home involved. Some states, there has to be a funeral home involved. Some states, you can file your own death certificates and basically do everything as long as you're reporting correctly to all of the proper channels. Obviously, you have to report a death to either like police department or whoever have you if it's an at-home death. But yeah, you have the rights to do this. So just so there's no confusion about like whether it's legal to do these things, a lot of places it is. It's just a matter of checking what your state laws are at the state level.
Yeah, and that's really cool about the death certificates. I didn't know that some states allowed for like individuals to file. But yeah, I mean, like we said before, every state is different. So like just check your state laws, or, you know, if you know someone in the funeral industry, or if you know a nice funeral home, they might tell you the state laws.
Yeah.
But but you know, it's good to just check if this is something you're interested in. And this would be for like, you know, if you have like, if you do live on a farm and you have like a family plot and you want to, you know, bury your relative there, there's, you know, there's ordinances and, you know, stuff like this. And like, I'm sure there's like you have to do 6 feet down or something like this, but you know, it's doable. It's not highly regulated like people think it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say one thing though. I don't want to see any of you guys burying grandma in your backyard without telling the cops. Okay, this is not what this is about.
Right.
You still have to report the death.
Yeah, you have to report the death. Like, please let's not get this twisted. Like, somebody needs to know that your loved one passed away. So having services back in the home, reclaiming this sense of connection with our loved ones that pass away is extremely important. And maybe you're not on that level yet. Maybe you're not on the level of comfortability of having, you know, your deceased loved one at home. If you still want to contract with a funeral home to take care of your mom, your grandma, whatever, there's still ways that you can be involved and have that connection without having to have a full-blown funeral at your house. And so these are things that I personally, as a director, always try to recommend to families or do for my families because it does mean so much more to them. So something that you can ask your funeral director, maybe coming in to do like the final bathing or doing hair and makeup for your loved one.
Because honestly, funeral directors would love it if you did the hair and makeup.
Because you know what your deceased loved one looks like better than any of us do with the photos that you've given us. So it would definitely behoove you to do hair and makeup for us. Other things you can do is just being involved in the service itself. So picking out a personalized poem or writing a eulogy, or even something like a balloon release, something that gets, you know, you involved in the service or allows others to be involved in the service, like creating a takeaway for guests. Something that I like to do for my families is that, you know, if they say, oh, well, grandpa really liked golfing or grandma really liked baking, I make little takeaways for the guests that come to the funerals. So I've done before where I take little like golf tees and golf balls and like put a little flagger on them that say, you know, in memory of, you know, so-and-so and their dates. So next time that their family goes out to play 18 holes, they can use the special tee from the services that they had for grandpa. So little things like that like are little memories that create basically a promise in the future to remember this person. Like, yeah, I'm going to actively go out and in memory of my grandpa play a round of golf in his memory. Things like that bring us back and don't let us forget the person that we loved so much.
Another thing that I've seen before, especially working in a cemetery, that I think is like really nice, and it's like a little thing that you can do to get everyone involved, is the idea of taking at the cemetery. We're about to end tour, grabbing a handful of dirt and like tossing it into the grave.
Oh yeah, I like that one too.
Or like taking like a flower from the flower arrangement and tossing it into the grave. I think a lot of people just really like that because it's like them participating actively, like in the act of burial and like in the funeral of their loved one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when someone passes away, I feel like a lot of people have to take a back seat to everything that's going on. There's like this loss of control. Like you're basically, by the time, like from the time that you arrive to the funeral home on the day of a service to the time you leave the cemetery, you've just been like there. You've been an audience member to everything that's happening. And like, it's almost like disassociating like the entire time. And like, there's this moment every time that I ask, if like, family to come up and grab a flower, or another ceremony I do is like a handprint ceremony where you place your hand on the casket and leave fingerprints on the casket. You see this like kind of light come into people's eyes that like wakes them up and reminds them like, this person meant something to me. I'm being asked to do something to like leave with them, just like all those memories that they left with me are in my heart forever. Now I get to do something to like commemorate them. And it really changes the whole emotion for what's going on to include people into what's going on, instead of just, you can come, you can watch, you can't touch, you leave.
Right. And these are just small things. Like, we're not asking you to have grandma out on your living room sofa. Like, we're not asking you for that unless you want to. Like, that's cool. But these are just small things. Like, even if you're a funeral director listening right now, like, these are small ideas that you can bring to your family, even if they're not interested in the death positive movement, even if they don't know anything about it. Just having these interactions that you can give them to kind of, push this along to everyone. Everyone can do this. It's not just something reserved for like the hip, trendy funeral kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And like we literally, we crave, like psychologically, we crave ritual and ceremony. It's so important for us to do. So any way that we can get people involved, like it's invaluable to them. It really is, because these things, even though it seems silly, we've done 100 funerals, we've done it 100 times, and it's commonplace for us. Like these things matter for people because they only go to so many funerals in their life, and these things will be remembered. I actually had a family come back within a year. I lost another loved one, and unfortunately they didn't get to deal with me. They dealt with another director, and the director came to me. He's like, what is the handprint ceremony? They asked me to do the handprint ceremony, and I'm like, see, it works. Like these people, it stays with them forever.
Yeah, that's so nice. Honestly, that's so nice to hear.
Even when it comes to like down the line things, like it doesn't have to just be at the funeral itself, but just remembering these people like every week or every month, or like on the anniversary of their passing, just making sure that we keep their memory alive in some way, shape, or form, because it's so easy for us to just want to kind of like throw it away. Like, I don't want to feel bad anymore, so this is over and we're done with it. And then you like don't even like speak their name. Like it's like saying Voldemort to say your loved one's name again, like it's okay to remember those people and to talk about them, to talk about death and how it makes us feel.
Absolutely. And I think that's the main point of the death positive movement, is to like stop hiding death. Like it's okay. Like it's okay to have these emotions. It's okay. Everyone dies. Like it's okay to be involved. It's okay to deal with it in your own way that makes you comfortable. And it's not something that we should be demonizing. It's not something that we should be afraid of. Like I think that's the whole thing about the death positive movement. It's just being aware and being present and like being in the moment. And I think like small things like this and even like big things can definitely help with that. And I think everyone has the capacity to be able to do that.
I agree, especially in the society that we live in today. It's extremely fast paced, the lifestyles that we live. A lot of people get little to no bereavement time when it comes to like spending time to make arrangements for their family, but also just like be in their emotions. Like we've basically developed to the point that we're production. Like, it's all about production, and grief gets in the way of production. And so we try to push down our emotions. We segregate the dead and dying into hospitals so we don't have to see them dying and see the illness and be bummed out about it. And we've outsourced bodies to funeral homes so funeral directors can take care of it because our lives are just so busy. And that's just what happens when when society develops to the point that we specialize as hard as we do. I mean, everything is so specialized. I mean, you know, when you're like meeting a new person and you're like, oh, so what do you do? And he's like, yeah, I'm in transportation analytics and development. And it's just like, what does that even mean? But that's the society we live in. We need that guy to do that job because we just have so much going on and so many people to take care of on like the global level. So that's why that we've gotten to this point. So it's okay. It's okay that funeral homes exist. It's okay that funeral directors exist, but it's also okay that, you know, death doulas exist and people want to have funerals at home. There is definitely a future where these two concepts can live in peace together. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. There can be options. That's the glory of life, is that it doesn't have to be cookie cutter. We can do all sorts of things.
Yeah, like, do I think we're ever gonna go back to the days where like grandpa's dying in bed and like we wash his face with like, you know, white linens and like the washing tub or whatever? Like,
Yeah,
no,
right.
you know what I mean? Like, and we're not gonna, you know, wheel him out with a horse and buggy. Like, it's not happening. But there are, you know, small things that we can do to make it better, make it more personable, and make it like more familiar, make death more familiar with everyone and not so scary and not so hidden away. So we just wanted to give you guys some things to think about maybe the next time you're at a funeral for some distant relative, or, you know, people are, you know, not really sure what to do. You can ask the funeral director explain to them what a handprint ceremony is. Maybe they'll be like totally fascinated by it, and there's no reason why they wouldn't let you do it. Ask about throwing in a handful of dirt on top of the coffin. Ask about any of the things that we've talked about. Like, the really cool thing about funerals is that you are the boss. Like, you are the boss. So ask for it and you probably will get some version of it, if not exactly what you asked for. Am I like being too, is that too much?
No. Yeah, I've had families ask me for plenty of things, and I have pretty much never had to say no, except for the time a family wanted to put a gun in the casket. Can't do that. But likewise, like, same thing. Funeral directors back on, like, all of these little things that I've done for families. I have never had a family come back to me and say, "Well, I didn't like that. I didn't like that you gave us like a jar full of cookie ingredients so we could bake cookies in grandma's honor because she loved baking." Like, I have never ever had that happen. So
who would not like that? Come on.
Exactly. People love
so
the amount of thought
wholesome.
that we can put into something, and it makes the service one to remember instead of one to try to move through and easily forget. It's going to make it so much more meaningful for everyone involved.
So the first and most important thing that we all can do is just have a conversation about death with our families, with our loved ones. Just sit down, maybe over dinner, maybe over some drinks. Have a little conversation about what's important to you, what you want, what you like, what you don't like, what you're thinking about, anything really. Just get that conversation started.
So it's time for you guys to start talking, but for us to stop talking, because that's it for this week on MortMic. We love to connect with you guys on our socials. Like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at MortMic Podcast. That's MortMicPodcast. It would mean a lot to hear your feedback, so please tell us what you think in a comment, or drop us a rating on whatever podcast hosting site that you use. If you have any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear, or burning questions you might have about death, shoot us an email at mortmicpodcast@gmail.com.
I also want to give a huge thank you to our friend Marson for the use of his song titled Deputies of Death, which he produced just for our show. You can check out his Bandcamp at Marson, that's MARSON, music.bandcamp.com. Thanks, Marson.
And be sure to tune in every other week on Thursdays for some more casual discussions on death. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been MortMic.
Bye.
Bye!